Welcome everyone to our LGBTQ plus webinar, which is part of National Fertility Awareness Week 2023. My name is Bethan, my pronouns are she, her, and I work for Fertility Network UK, providing support to anyone on a fertility journey, but also leading on our LGBTQ plus specific support. So we know one of the sort of biggest barriers right now facing LGBTQ plus couples is significant lack of funding in NHS fertility treatment, especially in England, and that creates an unfair and unequal pathway to parenthood. And sorry to put some of our panel on the spot, but both Two Dads UK and LGBT Mummies have been instrumental in driving these changes through UK Parliament. So maybe if they're happy to, they can share a bit about the work their fantastic organisations have been doing to make IVF access fairer for us as LGBTQ plus people in England. Tonight's Q&A webinar will focus predominantly on the support available during your fertility journey as an LGBTQ plus person, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by an inspirational panel, including Michael from Two Dads UK, Laura Rose from LGBT Mummies, and Meg and Kayleigh from the Instagram handle Our Little Gay Life, all of whom are on different stages of their family building journeys. They very kindly agreed to share their stories with you around their experience of accessing support alongside their fertility journeys and take questions from you as well. As always, their journeys are individual to them, and at Fertility Network UK, we advocate always taking treatment and medical advice from your clinician who is leading on your care. This session's being recorded. You'll be able to watch it back as we'll share it on our YouTube channel. And for reassurance, we're only recording the speakers. Please do ask any questions you want on the topic by submitting them in the Q&A panel, and we'll get through as many as we can. And again, for reassurance, the panel can see the questions only and they'll be read out anonymously. So without further ado, let's begin tonight's session. We'll start with each of the panel introducing their journey so far, and then we'll move to talking specifically about support. So the support that we access or did access, the support that they wanted or indeed needed to access but maybe wasn't available, and their experience overall of accessing fertility support as an LGBTQ plus person or couple. Laura Rose, if you're happy, we will begin with you. Welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. As Bethan said, I'm Laura Rose. I'm founder of LGBT Mummies. My pronouns are she, her, and we started our fertility journey down the path to motherhood about 12 years ago. And we decided that the pathway that felt right for us was to go through a private clinic, because at the time our ICB, well, CCG back then, Clinical Commissioning Group, now Integrated Care Board, didn't provide equitable access for same-sex couples or anyone in our community. So we knew we'd have to find that money, so financially fund it. So we started that journey, and over the last 12 years, we have had success. We have had 4 children, 2 of which my wife carried, 2 of which I carried, 2 by IUI, 2 by IVF. And we've had 13 cycles over those 12 years, and that includes a miscarriage, birth trauma, secondary infertility, PCOS. Between us, we've ticked a lot of fertility difficulty boxes, but incredibly lucky that we have had the children that we've been able to have. And it's been a long journey. It's been one that, we've had to take breaks through because our psychological health was just being impacted, and trying to conceive during the pandemic as well was quite a difficult time, having to go to appointments separately, transfers, collections, was quite difficult, but of course incredibly lucky that we have had success in our journey, and hold on to that, and that's why we started the organisation LGBT Mummies, and we're a global organisation that supports LGBTQ plus women and queer people that identify as mums on the path to motherhood or parenthood. So we support about 60,000 people. We have 20 private support groups, and we do a lot of policy and campaign work, as Bethan said. And we do education and training and consultancy for organisations, charities, the NHS, government, midwives, to ensure that our community are understood, represented, validated and present in guidelines, policies and laws. So we're trying to make a change, the landscape for families that look like all of us. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Thank you, Laura Rose. Michael, are you happy to go next?
Yeah, of course. Hi everybody, I'm Michael Johnson Ellis. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a gay man and I'm married to my husband Wes. And we met in 2012, and my husband had and has a daughter from a previous heterosexual relationship. So Katie is now 19, and at the time when I met Wes, I knew I wanted more children, or wanted to be a parent. So Wes and I, after we got married in August of 2014, that's when our fertility journey began. We always preferred the route of reproductive medicine rather than adoption or fostering. That was purely our preference, and so we went on a surrogacy journey. We both used our sperm to produce our embryos. We have 2 children, and we have experienced loss along our journey. We've had 1 failed cycle in between our 2 children. We'll come on and talk about support later. There was none for us as 2 gay men, but we had treatment through a licensed fertility clinic in the UK. So we have an anonymous donor for our first child and a known donor for our 2nd child, and we are now embarking on our next journey. So we have an embryo transfer scheduled for the end of November. And that's my journey so far.
Thank you, Michael. Did you want to talk a little bit about the work your organisation are doing with UK Gov?
Sure.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So I have been involved with the All-Party Parliamentary Group and the Law Commission since 2015, mainly campaigning, or started campaigning, for surrogacy law reform. That now has been successful, and in March of this year, the Law Commission announced their final bill, which we're just waiting for government to respond to, and hopefully that will become new legislation in the next 18 months. It radically changes surrogacy in terms of the legal parentage, the process, the regulation, and above all else, to keep everyone safe, particularly women and the welfare of children. So we've been campaigning for that tirelessly. It feels like forever. I had hair at that point. But it's been a great journey, and one that we're really proud of. I've also been involved with a similar campaign, and on the campaign with Laura Rose, looking at IVF provision for all, and we were in Parliament a week or 2 ago talking about that, and I'm back in Parliament on Tuesday with regards to the APPG for the surrogacy law reform. So I consider myself to be a bit of a fertility activist, like the majority of the people on this webinar too, and we're there to support our community and those that need the level of tailored care and support, like people like myself and my husband and anyone else that identifies within our community.
Thank you, Michael. And welcome Kayleigh and Meg to our webinar as well. If you're able to just share a bit about your journey so far. Thank you.
Hi, so we're Kayleigh and Meg. Our pronouns are she, her. We are a married bisexual couple who are undergoing fertility treatment currently. Our fertility treatment or our fertility journey started about 18 months ago. We're very lucky that we live in one of the areas that does offer NHS funding without needing to self-fund any rounds of treatment. So we do class ourselves as extremely lucky. We've just been through 1 cycle of IUI, which unfortunately wasn't successful, and we are just partway through our 2nd cycle, and we've got fingers crossed.
Thank you both. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves and sort of letting everyone know a bit where you are on your journeys. So as I mentioned, tonight's session is predominantly about support. So if you're happy to share your experience of support, so both the sort of support that you did access and your experience of that as an LGBTQ plus person, and then maybe looking back or thinking currently, what do you wish that you could have accessed as well? And Laura Rose, are you happy to take that question first again? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, from a perspective of the lack of support with lack of fertility funding provision, like Michael said, we were in Parliament last week, and have been tirelessly campaigning for that for the last decade. And getting to this point, we were expecting that it would have changed, and that equal and equitable funding would have been provided, and it hasn't been. The promise hasn't been fulfilled. Hence why we're back in and out of Parliament pushing for that forward, because we know how many women and people, especially others in our community like Michael and his husband and others trans non-binary people, that are missing and left out of that funding provision. So we're fighting for them too. We want that change for them, national mandated policy. So again, fertility activists, we just want equal access for people, because it's not appropriate that some people are able to access treatment to start their family and others aren't. And that one big portion of support that is missing means that there are thousands of people in our country missing out on having a child by their first chosen route and being pushed down alternative routes that either aren't fit for purpose, that don't legally protect them or their children or their donor, or that they just don't want to go down that route because it's their only option, which is, we feel it's wrong. Support wise, you're talking 10, 12 years ago, there wasn't anything. We were the only gays in the village that we knew that were having kids. Everyone else was having fun and out partying still. And we had got decidedly very boring. We're like, we have to save all our pennies because we want a baby. And it just was really difficult. It was discombobulating, isolating. There was no one really to ask the questions, you know, what clinics are safe? How do you acquire a sperm donor safely? What banks to use? You know, what language should you be looking out for to make sure that it's a space that you will be represented and understood? And we were really lucky with our clinic. We used CRGH in London, and they were a safe space. But once we exited out of that safe space into the system, we had a lot of discrimination, a lot of assumptions, unconscious bias. We experienced some really awful discrimination when we had our first child. And I feel that the support that we wished we'd had back then was that someone had sat us down and said, look, these are some really awful things that you might hear, that you might have said to you, really uncomfortable and difficult, that people may invalidate you, specifically for me as the non-biological mother or parent. And nobody sat me down and had those conversations. Even in implications counselling, we kind of saw it as a tick box, and please don't, because you really need to make use of that. It's crucial. And that's one of the areas I think that those questions and those difficult experiences that you may have, knowing how to address them. If a healthcare professional goes, well, you're not the real mum, I want the real mum, which was my experience the day after our child was born. Having people say, are you sister, are you mum, are you nan? You know, having to consistently come out, address that the forms aren't fit for purpose. We're a square peg in a round hole. So all of these things, you know, that we consistently address with the government and make those recommendations for change, we feel should have been done a long time ago. You know, there's 1.5+ million of us in the UK from the community, if not more. And unfortunately, that support and that understanding of our journeys isn't there. So for us, you know, those difficult questions and those difficult conversations that people don't want to talk about, the stigmatizing things of, oh, I'm the non-gestational parent, but I'm the genetic parent in reciprocal motherhood or parenthood. What does that look like? I feel like a surrogate. All these questions that people have need to be addressed. So that's why as an organisation we talk quite openly about the negative stuff as well as celebrating, because unless you know what can happen, you don't know how to positively counteract it and turn it into that positive experience. So changing that landscape for us is so important, and we can all do it in so many different ways. So yeah.
You, Laura Rose. Michael, are you happy to share next a bit about the support?
So I guess there's some similarities here already. So our journey started sort of 8 years ago. And a bit similar to Laura Rose, I was one of the first people in my friendship group, or my gay friendship group, that wanted children. I've always wanted to have children. So when we began our journey, I knew nobody in my immediate circle. So there was no one to ask for advice or ask for support. When we chose our fertility clinic, there were no photographs of people that look like me. There were families of mine not represented. I chose Care Manchester for our first clinic, and we chose CRGH for our second. We chose Care Manchester because We liked the surrogacy team. Their knowledge was good. And they were doing at that point the most number of surrogacy IVF cycles with donor eggs. So I felt reassured there. But like Laura Rose, I had to scribble out parts of the form. I had to keep correcting people that I didn't have a wife. I constantly felt that my husband was othered throughout the process because they were speaking to me because I was the person providing the sperm the first time around. So I definitely felt that whilst the clinic was very experienced in surrogacy, when you're certainly a gay man exploring surrogacy, there's not usually a fertility issue. So you land at surrogacy at a very different point as if you were struggling with your fertility. So there's a different feeling emotionally and how psychologically you're prepared for that journey. And we were spoken to and treated like there was constantly a diagnostic or an investigative issue with our fertility, and there wasn't. So we just wanted people to be joyous and to celebrate with us throughout that journey, and it didn't feel like that. It always made us feel quite anxious, which was really sad. The support was lacking throughout. There was implications counselling. I wish someone would have sat me down and told me to take that more seriously in the beginning, because no one told me what it was for. I thought it was a tick box exercise, but it absolutely isn't. And use your counsellor as much as you can when you're going through treatment, because as with our second child, I'm not genetically linked to him, and there was issues that I had to unpack post-birth with him that I wasn't prepared for, that I could have been. And that was all around genetic loss and overcompensation, and me desperately wanting to feel very connected with my son, and not accessing the support I should have sooner to deal with that. So then when we were discharged from the clinic into the wider world of the NHS, that's when the fun really started, because support didn't really exist for two gay men entering into maternity services. That was just turning up in a maternity unit for a scan with our surrogate, her husband, me and my husband, all wanting to go in a scan room. That was fun, and then became quite triggering, because the sonographers would use words like only the real dad is allowed to come in this room, and again it stings. So I just wish I was more armed and prepared in the beginning to get myself ready for some of that. And I could have easily done that if I listened more to amazing organizations like Fertility Network UK, or like any of the guidance that exists from the Department of Health in regards to surrogacy or counselling as well. So that's kind of the support that I guess I didn't get. It's definitely better now, so I don't want to be all doom and gloom. Surrogacy support is phenomenally better now, and there's so much guidance out there, and we're doing some great work with the NHS and the Department of Health and Social Care to continue to improve that. So and we're going to talk more about that in a wee while.
Thank you, Michael. And Kayleigh and Meg, last but not least, if you're happy to share about the support that you've accessed or wish was available to you to access.
Yeah, so I think for us, it's been a bit of a mix of kind of good and bad. There's definitely, I think, especially at the beginning, been a lot of bad, just in terms of when we were first kind of asking our GP for any kind of answers about what we were able to access and that kind of thing. There was just kind of, you know, blank faces and incorrect information almost all of the time. And then that continued when we were getting into kind of our current provider as well, with the actual fertility clinic, because we're with because we have NHS funding. There's a lot of kind of just red tape and confusion, and you know, no clarity around what is actually available to us and what the differences are between us as NHS patients versus people who are paying for their care privately. And there still is confusion around that quite a lot of the time. Definitely, just I have queer friends who have had children before us, and as is Meg. So that for us was like the best possible position for us to be in, to be able to actually say, like, God, where do we start with this? And you know, one of those friends is accessed their care in Manchester, so they paid for their care. So it's very different to our situation again, but they still had some kind of idea of, you know, what we could possibly be faced with. And then we've also got some brilliant friends who are, again, really lucky, like us, who are actually they are NHS funded and live near to us now. And they had really good idea of what we were about to be faced with in terms of what care they were going to be accessing and what we would then access. So that was brilliant.
I think we've had a lack of professional support and a lack of professional guidance and signposting, but we've been incredibly lucky in terms of peer support, in terms of having friends, but also stumbling across Fertility Network UK, which has just been massive to us. It's not something that we were ever signposted to. There's been no signposting to support services. We've really had to dig around for them. And social media has been fantastic for that, because it's that day and age now. But it's certainly been centred around peer group support rather than sort of any professional signposting or any sort of professional advice, really. We've really had to dig for that, or fight for it, or really challenge for it on occasions.
I think that's one of the biggest things that we've found the most useful through all of this, that we're able to say it now and able to advise other people and tell people, you know, you have to advocate for yourselves, because no one else is going to do it. No, the doctors who are in the room with you might say, well, this is the best treatment for you, or you know, we'd recommend this, but they may have no experience of dealing with you know, two women who are trying to get pregnant rather than a man and a woman. And I think we're able now to say to people, like, please just advocate for yourself. Like, don't take what you know, a doctor or the healthcare professional is saying is the best option, because you know what's best for you. It's definitely one of the better things that we're able to say now. This is something that's brilliant for us, but definitely wasn't the case at the beginning.
Thank you both. We have had a couple of questions come through, so we'll start with those. So the first one who came through, and Laura Rose, you might be able to answer this one. We're at the initial testing stage and have found our local NHS fertility department obstructive, unhelpful, and actually quite harmful. Basically, because of their incompetence, one of us is now above the age threshold, so can't get treatment at all. Any tips for navigating this, especially if we become pregnant and have to rely on them for our care? It's really daunting.
I'd say if there have been like discrimination, or there's been delays because of no due diligence being carried out or poor care, they've definitely got a case to go to PALS and put in a complaint. And that's the Patient Advisory Liaison Service, and they can do that. And they can obviously express that their disdain at the fact that it's actually put one of them out of the age threshold, the category for their criteria. So they want that readdressing, and they can put in an individual funding request for that with their ICB and address why it's happened, and they could maybe potentially overturn that. Secondly, they can write into their MMVP, their Maternity and Neonatal Voices Partnership, which I'm one of the chairs for Mid and South Essex, and they're a working group of women and people and their families and midwives and professionals that work to improve maternity services. But what they do is they take your feedback in what the services are doing, and they have to evidence, the trust have to evidence that they're making those changes. So that's definitely a way to go through it. And again, navigating it once you get pregnant, as Kayleigh and Meg said, you need to self-advocate, and if you don't feel you can, take someone with you. You have that opportunity to take someone along and say, I don't feel safe, I don't feel that the service is fit for purpose, so I've brought along not just my partner or whoever it is, my known donor, someone to support me, because they are going to advocate for me whilst I am present. And they can do that. They can explain what the situation is and make sure that you feel safe. You shouldn't be going into a service where you don't feel safe, it's harmful. So you can do those things. And again, making sure that if you do feel confident to self-advocate, feedback back and say, I don't appreciate the way I was spoken to. I don't appreciate these forms aren't fit for purpose. Who could I speak to make these improvements and ensure that I get feedback that these changes are being made? Again, the MMVP is a great place, but you can also speak to heads of midwifery or heads of department as well.
Thank you. And Laura Rose, I know you're back to back with live webinars tonight, given it's National Fertility Awareness Week, so I know you need to leave us. But we've had a question specific to you, so if you're happy to just answer this one before you need to go on.
Yeah.
And it is, Laura Rose, would you mind discussing how you felt when you were the parent that didn't give birth?
Yeah, and I do apologise for anyone that's watching if you do find this triggering. Being the non-birthing parent and non-genetic parent, as I mentioned, was my first experience of becoming a mother or a parent. And again, I didn't have that conversation with anyone that people would invalidate me or treat me any differently. So, you know, other than it being a difficult journey to get to that point, and we'd had a miscarriage, a loss of our baby, it had been an okay journey. It'd been a difficult one, but we got through it. But when it got to the point of having having our child, sorry, it paused. When it got to the point of having our child, being discriminated against and told, you're not the real mum, I don't want you, get out, I want the real mum. And having an obstetrician refuse to deal with me because of that was my first experience of being invalidated. And that's not to say that everyone's going to have that experience. Not everyone does, but unfortunately that was mine and ours. And it did lead to potentially like a year and a half of feeling I had to validate myself in every situation. I would cry in front of strangers when people would awkwardly get confused as to say in front of children or family members, oh, no, my wife was her mum, because they then didn't know how to explain who I was or what that looked like, because no one really knew anyone like us. So it was a really difficult time. And I know it impacted my wife. I know she had to overcompensate for my relationship with our daughter. And it did lead to a lot of bonding issues, and my mental health really depreciated at that time. But again, had someone told me what that might look like, I could have positively had a conversation and gone, okay, this isn't very nice, but what do I do if someone says this to me? How do I counteract it and say, no, I am the real mum. You can't talk to me like that, and put in a complaint, etc., which we did. But obviously the damage was done by that point. So again, that's why LGBT Mummies, we advocate those difficult conversations and talk about them to remove that stigma. So it's not to upset people or be negative, but to say, this may happen. How do you change it? And for me, becoming a non-birthing parent could have been really positive. But in that instance, for me, my personal journey, it was difficult. But there's many journeys that people have really positive experiences, have nothing that happens. And our other child that I didn't carry, I had a great experience. I didn't experience anything like that. So it's just arming yourself with the language and the tools to advocate for yourself. And if you don't feel you can, your known donor, your co-parent, your wife or partner, they can do that for you too. There was many instances in that situation where my wife stepped in because I couldn't verbalize it because I was too upset. So that's really important too. But being a non-birthing parent, I love my children, no different to the two that I've carried. So it's a wonderful experience.
Oh, Laura, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you also for joining us tonight. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okie dokie. The next question, Michael, I'm going to come to you for this answer. I'll read it out. It is, let me bring it over to my screen. Hi, I am a gay man. I want to have children at one point, but I'm not at the point yet where this is an immediate next step for me. How long does it take from starting the process of surrogacy to birth of the child? I know there won't be a timeline that fits all, but I'm wondering if it's possible to give a rough idea. My second question would be, what organisations you can recommend if you want to start your surrogacy journey here in the UK? Lastly, what should I expect financially? What costs would you expect throughout the process? And is there any support? Thank you so much.
No worries. That's all. I can answer all that fairly straightforwardly. Thank goodness.
Thank you.
So you're right. There is no one size fits all for how long a journey should take, because as men and as gay men, any treatment that we need to go through for surrogacy, we have to self-fund because we don't have any IVF provision at the moment for men. There are two different types of surrogacy that you can do. You can do straight surrogacy or traditional surrogacy, which is when you would home inseminate with your surrogate. So she would also be your egg donor. And then you've got gestational surrogacy or host surrogacy. And that's when you have IVF and you will have an egg donor in that mix as well. So by the very nature of the fact that gestational surrogacy or host surrogacy through a clinic, that is more expensive. So we'll come on to costs in a little bit. Traditional surrogacy, so home insemination with your surrogate, is obviously much cheaper, more affordable, because there isn't the IVF element. However, when doing home insemination or traditional surrogacy, there are tons of checks and balances that you need to make sure you do in terms of your screening, your DBS checks, your STIs, making sure that you're looking after yourself throughout all of that, and obviously getting legal advice. When you're going through a clinic, then all that's taken care of. So your consents are done very sensibly with your donor, and then you're obviously counselled as well. So you do get a more robust treatment doing gestational surrogacy versus doing home insemination. Average wait time for a surrogate in the UK is around 2 years. You can't advertise for surrogates, that's illegal. It's one of the current issues with the current Surrogacy Arrangements Act of 1985. That is likely to change, and the recommendation that came from the Law Commission would be that you can advertise for surrogates in the new legislation, but only if you're a surrogacy agency. Surrogacy agencies in the UK, there are 4 on gov.uk that are recommended by the government. One is called Surrogacy UK, the other is called COTS. There's another one called Brilliant Beginnings, and then there's a 4th called My Surrogacy Journey. My Surrogacy Journey, full disclosure, is the one that me and my husband run. We're now a team of 32 people, and we're now the 2nd largest surrogacy agency in the UK. We're supporting over 165 people, all on a pathway to parenthood. All of the surrogacy agencies are very different. You've got to do what feels right for you, and whether that's budget-led, time-led, or just clicking with the people. My Surrogacy Journey is the only surrogacy agency that's set up by parents that have been on the journey. The other organisations were set up by either lawyers or surrogates. So we've come at dealing with holistic, professional, emotional and practical support based on what we didn't get. So we created a pathway utilising embryologists, counsellors, fertility nurses, surrogates and intended parents to really bolster your support and make sure that your scaffolding around you is present, and that when you are wobbling, we know you don't yet know you're wobbling, but we know what's coming. So that's why we launched our organisation. But you have to do what's best for you, you know. We also have another organisation called Two Dads UK. So twodadsuk.com. Feel free to reach out to us there. You can book a free consultation and we take you through all the signposting. Two Dads UK has helped nearly 420 men become dads since 2016. And we do that all for free. We just point you in the best direction, from budget, from peer groups, from clinics, doctors, counsellors. It's what we do there. Cost, traditional surrogacy, well, surrogate's expenses. You can't pay a surrogate to carry a pregnancy. A surrogate can only reimburse her reasonable expenses. The word reasonable is very woolly. That can be anything. Your reasonable and mine might be 2 very different numbers. But the average surrogate's expenses is around £16,500. Some surrogates, if it's a family member, might be 0. I have known surrogates with expenses upwards of £35,000. There is no legislation saying what's right and what's wrong. It's another issue with the current law. Typical ballpark for a surrogacy journey in the UK, if you're doing gestational surrogacy, budget anything between 35,000 to 65,000, and then you will freeze your embryos and then thaw them per next transfer. So it's not £55,000 every time you go. You'll just have the cost of the embryo transfer and your surrogate's expenses. home inseminations, your costs are obviously minimalised. You would just have your surrogates expenses and maybe your testing and your legals. I'd budget anything up to about £25,000 for that type of journey. But feel free to head over to mysurrogacyjourney.com or gov.uk and just search surrogacy organisations and they'll all pop up there.
Thank you, Michael. The next question, Kayleigh and Meg, if it's okay, I'm going to come to you for this one. So how would you advocate for your partner when they are not allowed in the room throughout fertility treatments due to staff preference? And this comes from a lesbian couple who are doing IUI.
So we've had this happen to us on a couple of occasions. Quite recently, one happened where actually I received a bit of bad news, and it just was really traumatic to have to go and sort of rehash that back to Kayleigh in a waiting room full of people. So we are quite strong on it now.
Yeah.
I think it's about advocating for yourself and being strong. So since that's happened, it is ever an occasion now where, because I'm the I hopefully will be the parent who's undergoing treatment, it's often obviously me that's called into a room, but now I always say, okay, Kayleigh, come on. And the second time round where I was told after that bad news that I needed to go back in to see the nurse, and Kayleigh didn't need to be present, I was really clear on saying, actually this is both of us, and we want to be seen together, and that's how we want to be spoken to. We're quite lucky that we haven't come up against it since, other than being called in and Kayleigh being addressed as my friend, which was a moment. But yeah, I think it's just been really strong with yourself and knowing that you and both your partner have the right to be there, and making that feeling very well known.
Yeah. And if that does happen, ask why. Don't just take it for face value as like, well, this is the staff member's preference. Like, well, that's not our preference. Yeah, and if it is the kind of thing where you don't want to say it to the person's face or anything like that, like, have it in writing as to what's happened and contact the clinic and say, this has happened, this was not okay, this is discrimination, we won't accept that going forward. Yeah, just being able to say, like, we're in this together, it's not just one and not the other. I think definitely.
Thank you. We've had a question come through which I'm just responding to via chat, but it is somebody asking us about how do you find out if you can get NHS funding as a lesbian couple. To let anyone know who wants that information, at Fertility Network UK we have quite a substantive page. It's Fertility Network UK .org/access support/NHS funding. I'll pop the link for all of you to read as well, but that is where we have put together everything, so ICBs in England, and also what that access looks like for anyone who is LGBTQ plus throughout England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, because whilst England is very much a postcode lottery, in those other three countries it is done on a country-wide scale. Michael has sort of already pointed to it as well, but sadly, and it's something that his organisation are really working on, is often what we find is fertility funding on the NHS for men or those born with male sex organs is much less than those who are either women or those who are born with female sex organs. So take a look at that website, and you can always contact Fertility Network UK as well direct. We've got an information line, and that is the purpose of that phone line. It's free, everything we do is free at the point of delivery, and we'll be able to access that information for you. That person, or so those two people that asked that question, the second person who asked that question asked a follow-up, and that is, and I'm going to come to both Kayleigh and Meg and Michael for this because it's anonymous, so I'm not entirely sure of their gender. What would be your advice if you wanted to start a family but not sure where to start? Michael, are you happy to take that question first?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's a real thread of similarities coming through, and peer-to-peer support is definitely, I think, one of the areas that I felt safest talking with, because for me, I always knew I wanted to be a parent, and I couldn't wait to start that particular journey. But there's lots of factors, lots of considerations, and there's nothing better than, you know, speaking to other people that have been through a journey that can give you advice or tips or recommendations of clinics or equipment or whatever it is you're looking for. The HFEA, the fertility regulator, have a really thorough website that you can dive into and have a review. And most clinics now, thankfully, have really good LGBTQ plus pages to their website, so they'll definitely give you a flavour if they're working with people like us. But in terms of, you know, making those first steps, reach out online to, people that have been on this particular call, or Fertility Network UK, or some of the other people that advocate for sharing their fertility journeys online. I think there's a lot to be said in having real conversations with people that have been through the journey, rather than sometimes looking at some of the glossy staged photographs on websites that aren't necessarily a true depiction of the highs and the lows of fertility treatment. But being a parent is one of the best blessings. I would also say, this is a shameless plug now, the Modern Family Show happens in September every year. It's the only LGBTQ family building event in Europe, and it's designed all around emotional support. It's designed around clinic choices, fostering, adoption, co-parenting, fertility preservation, you name it. It's a safe space for people to come to see if being a parent is for them, or a foster carer. So yeah, that's the modernfamilyshow.com. Have a nose.
You, Michael. And to add to your shameless plug, so Fertility Network UK attended that show this year, and as an LGBTQ plus person, so myself and my wife, we went through IVF to create our family, and that was 9-10 years ago now, and I know at the time I really would have benefited from a show like that, so it is worthwhile. And I think in terms of offering, maybe just briefly that other side. So myself and my wife, we went through 9 rounds of IVF actually to get to the point where we brought home a baby. And I think quite often that goes unheard. I think quite often there's the expectation or the need for LGBTQ plus people to experience a really happy, dynamic exchange in a fertility clinic. And I think what we found towards the end of our journey is an experience of frustration with that, because our journey had moved from absolutely being excited at the beginning to very much being in the trenches of infertility. And so often what we experience as a gay couple who had been through numerous cycles that weren't successful, or we'd experienced pregnancy loss, is we didn't want to be met, I suppose, with that positivity, with that excitement. We needed to be heard, and we needed our journey to be accepted on par with other couples who experience unsuccessful cycles and pregnancy loss and difficulties. And I wish we'd had a space where we could express that and talk to other people who were just like us. And actually, I think what happened is we started to access support in the LGBTQ plus space because we absolutely resonated more with them. And as our journey progressed, we almost dipped out of that and dipped into access and support where we were amongst other people who were experiencing similar to us. And they were so often dominated by heterosexual couples. And funny enough, I shared my story just this week with LGBT Mummies, but actually we just felt really alone we felt we needed to prove ourselves in a space that was really dominated by heterosexual couples. We felt we weren't accepted. We felt we had to, as I've said, prove our infertility status. And that's really hard, actually, when all you're doing is going to a group to access support. So in a similar vein to Michael's shameless plug, at Fertility Network UK, we're really proud to have 3 different LGBTQ plus peer support networks. So I've got no doubt Kayleigh and Meg will talk about their experience, but there's one that is for those who are just starting out. So those who haven't yet had fertility treatment but want to come together and seek information from each other, share that journey with others. We have one then for people who are undergoing treatment and might have gone through multiple rounds of treatment already. And then we've also got a 3rd group now, and that is for those who are LGBTQ plus and have been successful. So they are pregnant after a fertility journey. But Kayleigh and Meg, if it's okay, I'm going to come to you to answer that question. Do you want me to read it out again?
I can see it, and I think for me, I think I'd echo what Michael has said in terms of online support and having those real conversations with real people, because of when you do first start out and you do read all those glossy magazines, it's a very picture perfect situation and you think things are just going to run smoothly, and it's not always the case, and it can be quite a shock to the system. And it's kind of one of the reasons we put together our Instagram, was to seek that support for ourselves, but also to hopefully be able to provide it to other people. I think the other side of it for us is we can't speak highly enough about Fertility Network UK. The LGBT support group has just been so significant for us, for learning information, for also passing on our own experience, but just knowing we're not alone in this situation. We are incredibly lucky that we do have 2 sets of friends who are going through fertility treatment as LGBTQ hopeful parents, but that's not always the case, and it can feel very lonely, it can feel very isolated, and it can often feel like you're trying to prove yourself. So I think Fertility Network UK was such a massive stepping stone for us, for getting support and for learning to get signposted for things, for different advice, for sort of what questions that we should ask, what treatment was available to us. It's been massive for us.
I do not have anything else to add to that. That is the answer to that question.
Thank you. So we've had quite a few questions around sort of implications, counselling, and any tips, any advice or questions to ask. So I think you can probably both answer this question. So Michael, are you happy I come to you first?
Oh, go for it. I can see the questions there. So in terms of prepping for implications counselling, I think I would just urge anyone to be really honest, and it's okay to not always feel like rainbows and unicorns on a fertility journey. There's often this expectation where you have to feel excited, and if you feel apprehensive or nervous, does that mean you've got doubts? Well, no, it doesn't necessarily, but the counsellors are incredible. And what I found really useful is, because our journey was about donor, talking to a future child that was donor conceived, that is so important to get your head into, because when we're on the journey, we're just fixated of getting pregnant or creating embryos. You don't necessarily think about the conversation with a future child. You sometimes don't even want to think about that because it might be too raw or triggering. But really give that some thought around how you will plan to tell that child that what their genetic makeup looks like, and how do you feel about not being genetic linked to having a genetic link to your child? Does that bother you, or does that make you feel sad? And again, these are all quite normal, but again, it's you don't know what you don't know. And I would say that if you find that you're not gelling with your counsellor as well, that's also fine. You should self-advocate, and if you want to have a connection with a counsellor, because you will just talk more freely and they will listen more, sort of with more empathy. I had a fertility counsellor when we very first started, and it just wasn't working out. It wasn't working, so I asked to change my counsellor, and it was the best thing that I could have done. So again, if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So have the courage to speak up, or have someone there to speak up for you.
Thank you. And I suppose I'd really like to echo what Michael said, in the implications counselling is about supporting you as a person or a couple, because I think so often I hear from LGBTQ plus people I support that they are fearful entering those sessions, that actually what they think they're about is that counsellor judging them on how fit they are to become parents. And because of that, they don't allow the space in order to receive the support that actually is the purpose of those. So don't be afraid. It's not about that. It's not about judging whether or not you're fit to be parents. It's about exactly as Michael so eloquently described. It's about supporting you on that journey, not just the journey through going through treatment, but also the journey thereafter. So for those who are successful, it's about supporting you and having those conversations with any future child born as a result of treatment.
I'd also just add quickly,
yeah.
sorry to be absolute nose, but I one of the things that I think you're not prepared for as an LGBTQ parent is the second outing. And I think that comes frequently when you have children. And I was not prepared for that. And when I came out the first time, it was horrific. I was outed. So the fear of having to tell someone I'm gay was, it still can sometimes not feel very comfortable. And when you have a child, the assumptions that your child has a parent of the opposite gender to you is what everyone considers the norm, which is really frustrating. So you can be in situations where you're safe in a supermarket, or you can be in situations when you might be on holiday and people ask your child where their dad is or where their mom is. And just prepare yourself for some of the psychological safety around that, because I was underprepared for being outed by my own daughter by saying that she doesn't have a mommy, she's got two daddies. Then I'm like, oh, thanks for doing that. And then I'm looking around, see who's looking at me. Just something to prepare for, and just make sure that you're looking after yourself.
Thank you. Kayleigh and Meg, did you have any advice or lived experience that you wanted to share with any implications counselling that maybe you've had along your journey so far?
So we just had the one, and it wasn't, I don't think it was at all what we expected it to be.
No.
So for us, like, it very much was that kind of tick box exercise, as Michael mentioned earlier as well.
I don't think we spoke.
No.
I don't think we spoke during the counselling. I think we were talked to.
It was very much like, it did not feel like counselling at all. It was more of an information session where we just received a lot of information. So I think potentially we don't know the answer because we probably didn't have it correctly. We did speak a little bit about kind of, the counsellor said, you know, obviously we will have the conversation with our child at some point when they figure out that, you know, most people have a mummy and daddy. That's what the counsellor said. And we will be kind of, like you just said, kind of outed by kind of that conversation, because at some point our child will probably come home from school or wherever and say, oh, well, why does that person have a mummy and daddy, but I've got two mummies? And how will we have that conversation? And what are we prepared for those answers? And are we prepared to speak to our child about their donor conception? And for us, it is something that, like, before we'd gone into that implications counselling session, we'd really considered quite a lot. It is something that had been on our mind already, because it is obviously a big question, is like, what is our answer to our future child about that? And that was like good information to kind of, we did receive like good information from that, in terms of like, she had some really nice kind of LGBTQ plus friendly family style, like, yeah, like children's books and things like that. So that was really nice. But I don't think otherwise there was a lot of additional kind of counselling, which probably, that seems wrong now, actually.
I think from hearing you guys speak, it's definitely made us go, oh, that's not the experience
not what we had.
So it's kind of raised a question for us slightly, hasn't it? Probably something we'll go away and discuss a bit more.
Yeah.
And revisit, don't be afraid. That counselling is there throughout your journey. So revisit it.
So that's something that I didn't know. So that's very good information.
Revisit it.
Thank you. So we've had a question. I'm mindful of the time. So we've got 4 questions left. So if the panel are happy to answer these 4, then unfortunately we won't be able to take any more. So the first one, and Michael, you've kind of alluded to this already. So about needing to educate people along your journey, and I guess the frustration that brings when you're supposed to be receiving support, but you consistently feel like you're educating and advocating for yourself. So do you have any advice for trans and non-binary couples looking for support and advocacy? Everything is, to us, always catered to cisgender people, and we're facing my husband carrying, and we're anxious about advocating in a space where we also need to educate.
Yeah, I'm sorry they feel like that. It frustrates the heck out of me. Funnily enough, I did an Instagram live last night with Jacob, who is a trans dad. And that was with a doctor as well, called Dr. Carol Gilling-Smith from the Agora, which is a wonderfully inclusive clinic in Brighton, that do a ton of work with trans and non-binary folks. I guess the sad reality is that we do have to self-advocate more as a community, but we all need to be self-advocate or advocating more for our trans and non-binary friends and siblings. Goes without saying, they need us more than ever. But I would absolutely reach out to Jacob. There's another account also on Instagram, the non-binary parent, Marley. They're amazing. There are some great resources through social media. It can be the devil, but it can also be this really friendly space to reach out to people just like you. So I would absolutely reach out to those 2 accounts. There is some great information as well on the Agora's website too. So by all means, have a look at their trans and non-binary section on the agora.co.uk, I think it is. But just search the Agora Clinic in Brighton and you'll see it there.
Thank you, Michael. So the next is a question for Kayleigh and Meg. So I had the first test with my GP over a few months, then was told due to my BMI, I was likely to be rejected for the referral, but to wait for a potential phone call from a clinic or a phone call from the GP to say it's been rejected. We received an email a few months later to say we have been referred, and now our telephone call booked in with a clinic. We have been given some very mixed information about BMI with NHS fertility guidelines. How did you find this, and have you come across this within your journey?
Yes, very much so. This has been a huge focal point in our journey. Very similar to yourself. So when I initially spoke to the GP, there was just a confusing thing around whether BMI would be a factor or not.
We knew it was.
Yeah, we knew it was.
Knew before we went to the GP, we knew we'd researched quite a lot about what we thought was the correct information from our local CCG, now ICB. So we knew what the criteria was ahead of going to the GP, and we knew that Megan would have to lose weight to be able to be eligible for access to the fertility treatment. So we joined Slim and World 3 months before we went to the GP. We knew what we were in for and started to lose the weight together.
But even so within Leeds, the criteria for BMI is 30. So when we spoke to our GP, I'd explained to the GP that I was over the 30 BMI. I was losing weight at the time, but still wasn't close to 30 BMI. I was still referred into the clinic. So when we had our first consultation, I was slightly off at that point. I was still a little bit off the BMI.
It was about a month to get to the point where we were under.
But we were still processed through. Now, where obviously we're Care Fertility in Leeds, I couldn't say the same for every fertility clinic. I'm not sure. I think in terms of starting point for you clarifying those guidelines is looking up the ICB or CCG, because I think as we still have to Google CCG. But is looking up the policy, the most recent policy and the most recent guidelines, because they will tell you what the eligibility criteria is. And I think once you've got that information in black and white, you can kind of start taking steps to ensure that you meet that criteria. It's certainly not an easy journey to do. Like I say, it has been the focal point of our journey for the past 18 months. I am forever on a diet. And it's been fun, but I think if you can't get the answers online in terms of the ICB, we contacted our ICB on a couple of occasions to ask questions, and they have come back to us with answers. So I said that's your first port of call.
I would say as well, if you get to that point where you are with a clinic, and it happened to us where we got the NHS funding and had it all confirmed, and we were like, great, we can come off the diet now. That was not the case for us. And that meant that when we thought that we would start treatment, actually Meg had gone over the BMI and we were refused treatment that month. So which was obviously devastating, because we thought we were there, we thought it was happening for the first time, and it was not.
We hadn't been made aware of that though, so that's definitely something to hold in mind.
So get as much information, like ask the questions if it's not clear, if it's not being kind of said to your face what the or said in writing, even better, what the kind of guidelines are, what the policies are, and how things will progress when you're in care for your fertility treatment. Just ask those questions, because we didn't ask that question as to whether we would have to maintain that weight throughout. It seems really obvious now, but it didn't at the time. So just ask those questions to get the clarity as well.
Thank you both, I appreciate it. So last but one question, and Michael, this one is for you, and that's, hi Michael, when is the new pathway from the Law Commission's review looking to be implemented? Will this make a difference for gay couples?
Okay, so the government had 6 months to respond, which was the end of September. Haven't responded. No real surprise there. But they have 12 months to make a recommendation on the proposal. We're still probably another 18 months away before that will come into as legislation. How does it change gay people? The current legislation has gone through some updates since 1985, so it doesn't necessarily exclude people. Gay men have been allowed to apply for parental orders since 2010. Parental order is currently when a surrogate gives birth, they are the legal parent to your child until you go through a parental order process. The new legislation, legal parentage will be granted from birth to the intended parents, providing you use a surrogacy agency to manage your care. So the pathway is very specific. Independent surrogacy, which is meeting a surrogate on Facebook, the Law Commission are not recommending that, and they're wanting people to go through a more regulated pathway. So we're probably 18 months off. It's a really inclusive piece of legislation. There were some things that we wished would have been in there, such as double donation, but that wasn't. But in terms of accessing that as gay men. It's very, very equal. Obviously, there's still a lack of NHS funding for gay men. That will probably be dealt with will be dealt with under separate legislation, hopefully, and we'll continue campaigning for that one. But yeah, there's information online on, if you Google the Law Commission, or if you head to mysurrogacyjourney.com, you'll be able to find something there too. There's a blog all about the draft bill.
Thank you. So the last question then that I'm going to ask of everyone, and that is, what has been the best advice you have received on your fertility journey? Which is a big question. I'm happy to take it first while the rest of the panel think. And this might not be what everyone wants to hear, and I'm really conscious of that. But from my personal journey, so I've shared already that it took myself and my wife 9 rounds. So I wish at the beginning that I'd been told it might not work. So this isn't the case for everyone. But I wish for me that I'd been told this, as I think I was wholly unprepared for how long the journey took us. I think as LGBTQ plus people, sometimes we haven't tested our fertility. And I've always been in a same-sex relationship, so I certainly hadn't. And along our journey, I was diagnosed with endometriosis and hypothyroidism. And ultimately, and this isn't the case for everyone, again, you can have both of those conditions and absolutely carry to full term. But for me, that meant I couldn't. I've had a hysterectomy. I did 7 rounds of IVF and never got to bring a baby home. So for me, and like I say, everyone's different, but for me, I wish that I had somewhat been prepared for the fact that it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. Michael, do you have...
I want to give you a massive cuddle now. This is where doing this is really annoying, because I just want to give you a big squeeze. Everyone has an opinion when you mention that you want children, and some of that information is going to come from a kind place. Sometimes it's going to come from, they think they're all of a sudden a fertility professional. Take your time with finding your rhythm, whether that's a clinic or the type of insemination you want to do, or whatever feels right for you. Don't feel pressured. Don't feel like you have to do the norm either. Do what makes you happy, because this can be a really grueling journey. You might be really lucky and this is a really straightforward journey, but you need to look after yourself first and foremost. So don't do anything that you're not comfortable with.
Thank you. And Kayleigh and Meg, do you have anything to add to what has been the best advice you've received on your fertility journey?
I think it isn't advice that we've been given, but I think that we wish that we'd had the advice, that the getting pregnant, and I say this is, we're 1 round in, so I might really regret saying this, but the kind of this bit that we're in now, and the getting pregnant isn't necessarily the hardest bit. We found the grueling bit so far, the getting here, because no one prepares you for how difficult it's going to be to actually get to the point where you're having the treatment. No one tells, and we say this as people who have got the NHS funding, and that's like, gold dust. But it was really grueling to get to this point, and to be able to actually have the treatment, to get to this point where we're not, I don't know, we
just weren't prepared for it.
Yeah.
We just weren't prepared. We thought that would be really easy. We weren't prepared for some of the discrimination that we faced, and yeah, we wish that we would have known about that before, and maybe just been more prepared for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we first started, we were expecting to probably have a baby at this point, not only just having our second round. Yeah, for the time that it takes as well.
We were very rose-tinted glasses.
God, yeah.
Oh, both, thank you so much for sharing. And thank you everyone for joining us. As always, Fertility Network UK, we're always here for you. So please do visit our website. It's fertilitynetworkuk.org. And there you'll find how you can access any of our support. And huge thank you to Laura Rose, Michael, Kayleigh and Meg for joining us tonight. Good night all.